The biggest reason for divorces right now, in my opinion, is infidelity.
كيف عم يكتشفوا هيدي القضايا؟ كيف عم يكشفوا بعض؟
I would say the opposite.
والله؟
Say arranged marriage has less divorce rate than when
هلا
you're
انت رح
finding
تفاجئي اللي رح يحضروا الفيديو.
the $1,000,000 question. We always get these calls.
شو اسباب الدومستيك فايلنس اللي عم بتصير او العنف الاسري اللي عم بيصير بحالات الطلاق اللي عم يمرقوا قدامكم؟ كثير من الرجال العربيه بيعملوا الوصيه الدينيه ان كان الوصيه الاسلاميه او غيرها من الوصايا، هل يا ترى هيدي الوصيه قانونيه في ولايه فلوريدا اذا صار في طلاق لا سمح الله؟ هل يا ترى المحكمه بتعترف فيها وبتطبق البنود تبعها؟
Unfortunately, divorce rate is now 2 out of 3 is getting divorced.
شو اسباب الزلمه او المراه عم بيخونوا بعض؟ فيهم يعملوا تبني لحدا من برات امريكا؟ محاميه، استاذه جامعيه، سيده اعمال، متطوعه وناشطه حقوقيه ومجتمعيه، ام وزوجه، واكثر من هيك بكثير، سيده القانون الاولى بفلوريدا. خلونا نعرفكم على المحاميه سماح ابو خضير. مرحبا سماح، كيفك؟ شو اخبارك؟ ماشي الحال؟ شكرا لاستقبالك لنا بمكتبك بميامي بفلوريدا. خبرينا مين سماح؟
I am a lawyer, I'm a professor, I'm a business owner, entrepreneur. The thing that I'm most proud of is what I've created with this business and how I've created it and how quickly we've grown, and you know, we're one of the fastest growing companies in the United States.
والله.
So alhamdulillah.
Tell us a bit about your background. خبرينا شوي عن حالك يعني personally شوي إذا ممكن يعني.
Sure.
وين خلقانة منين هيك شغلات.
Sure. So my parents are both from a town called شعفاط في فلسطين. They came in the late 80s. I was born and raised in Lake Wales, Florida, which is a town nobody has heard of, but it's in between Orlando and Tampa. Wanted to go to medical school and changed my mind the last minute. Abuya doctor, so I thought I have to be a doctor like him. So I want to do something different. So I went to law school. I came to Florida International University in Miami, went to law school, and then I stayed in Miami. I got my first job. You know, I started the company, and alhamdulillah, we went from 1 person to now almost 30 people, and we're continuing to grow. We're going to hire another attorney, inshallah, soon, more staff, more team members, and we're growing all over the state of Florida.
سماح احكي لنا عن الشركة، وين موجودين وأمتى أسستيها؟
So we're located in Miami, Florida. We started 5 years ago. My husband actually pushed me to start the law firm.
كسيدة ومتزوجة، صعبة إنه الواحد يبلش بزنس ويكون هو الأون باس؟
Very hard. And my husband's also an attorney, and we practice the same area of law, so it complicates things even further.
Okay. شو ال areas of practice الشغلات اللي بتعملوها هون؟
Sure. So it's Florida probate law and Florida family law.
Okay.
So divorce, child custody, paternity, alimony, domestic violence, and a whole other slew of items in the family law department. And then in probate, we do estate planning, we do estates, and we do guardianships.
شو المكاتب الموجودة هون؟ قديش عندكم staff صار هلا؟
This is the office. You can see everybody working right now. We have 8 attorneys and we have 20 plus staff members.
8 attorneys?
Yes, 8 attorneys. We're growing. We have 8 offices all over the state of Florida, and we are growing all over the state of Florida. Most of them are in South Florida, so Miami-Dade County, Broward County, and now we are in Tampa, Florida as well.
كمان بتامبا. بكل هودي المكاتب probate وفاميلي بكلهم.
Yes, in all offices.
صار في كتير طلاق ليتلي بالجالية العربية، عم تكبر الجالية وعم تكتر الطلاقات معها. من خلال يعني الاكسبيرينس تبعك والخبرة تبعكم هون بالمكتب، الحالات اللي عم تجي لعندكم، هل مزبوط انه عم تكتر الطلاق؟ هيدي أول سؤال. وتاني شيء، شو الأسباب بشكل عام؟
The biggest reason for divorces right now, in my opinion, is infidelity. There's also, in addition to infidelity, so think cheating, affair, something going on, there's also no communication in marriages anymore. So we're starting to see a lot of people in the Arab community having issues. We have evolved from having mostly arranged marriages to now the guys and the girls meeting each other, introducing each other to the families, and you know, starting the relationship that way. Unfortunately, divorce rate is now 2 out of 3 is getting divorced. Since COVID occurred, we've also seen an increase. So people were spending time at home. Unfortunately, they didn't like each other, too much time together, and as a result, there was more abuse, more domestic violence on children and spouses.
So you're saying basically one of the reasons is infidelity, right?
Yes.
كيف عم بيكتشفوا هيدي القضايا؟ كيف عم بيكشفوا بعض؟ let's say هل يا ترى بس رجال ولا كمان في نساء عم تقوم بهالموضوع؟
It's men and women. The majority is usually men, and the way that people are finding out is sometimes they're not smart about what they're doing. So
No.
you'll see on the credit card statements, you'll see extra charges, you'll see hotel rooms, you'll see things that are out of the ordinary.
No.
You know, you'll start to ask, why are you coming home at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning? So these are things that people are picking up on.
كمان بناء على القضايا اللي عم يجوا لعندك، شو أسباب الزلمة أو المرأة عم بيخونوا بعض؟
That's a great question. I would say that cause for infidelity is usually unhappiness. They were either forced into the marriage and then their families had a lot of involvement and pressured them into it. From a religious aspect, we understand that there are proper ways to go through the marriage process. However, it's extremely important that you're compatible with your spouse. You're not forced into a marriage. You're not forced to, have kids in the marriage, because at that point you're involving other people. But I think that that's the biggest reason that things are not working out.
اللي عم بيطلقوا هل يا ترى صغار كبار صار لهم زمان مع بعض صار لهم فترة قصيرة؟
It's all over. So we have people right now that are divorcing after 40 years of marriage, and then we have people that have been married for 6 months that are divorcing. It's a spectrum.
مثل ما بتعرفي نحن عندنا الجالية في شيء عندنا اسمه arranged marriage، يعني
Yes.
الأهل يمكن بيشوفوا لك عروس أو الأهل بيشوفوا للبنت عريس، فاهم
Yes.
كيف؟ وأوقات هيدا الarranged marriage الأهل بيكونوا مدبرينه ومظبطينه، أوقات بيكون من برات البلد. هل يا ترى هيدا عم بيساهم إنه عم نشوف أكثر حالات طلاق بالarranged marriage أكثر من الأشخاص اللي هن عم يتعرفوا على بعض الشاب والبنت؟
I would say the opposite.
والله؟
I would say arranged marriage has less divorce rate than when
هلا
you're
أنت رح
finding-
تفاجئي اللي رح يحضروا الفيديو.
I think that there's a pressure from the families when
No.
it's arranged. You don't want to disappoint your family. So although you're not the right people for each other, you stay married.
Okay.
And it's also the older generation. They don't believe in divorce.
مزبط.
So they're going to stay together. The newer generation, we think differently. We try to find our own spouses and, we try to work through things, but there's a higher rate of divorce.
كونك حكيتي عن هذا الجنريشنال ديفرنس، الفرق بين الأجيال، هل يا ترى يعني الشباب أسهل عليهم الطلاق؟ يعني لأي سبب عم بيطلقوا؟
I think yes. I think that there's not that pressure from the family. I also think that people are getting remarried. So even if you're divorced, on the woman, there's no longer a D on her forehead. She's able to go out, she's able to get remarried. For the man, it's always much easier.
بهيدي النقطة كمان اللي عم بيتجوزوا من البلاد، يعني عم بيتجوزوا حدا مش من نفس المدينة ومش من نفس البلد، يعني تسي أنا بأمريكا شاب جبت حدا من لبنان أو سوريا أو فلسطين أو حتى صبية كمان، يعني بالعكس هودي ناجحين عم بيكونوا ولا كمان في طلاق بهيدي الكاتيجوري كمان بهيدي الفئة.
There's divorce in all categories.
Okay.
So even if you come from a different country and you're getting married to an American citizen,
إيه.
we're still seeing divorces left and right.
Okay.
It depends on the people. It depends on what you've negotiated before.
Okay.
And when I say negotiate, I'm talking about a prenuptial agreement, a postnuptial agreement, where you sit down and you discuss, this is what I own before the marriage, this is how much money I have, this is how many kids I want, this is what I expect from the marriage. You've had that conversation. If you see eye to eye, there's less likeliness of a divorce.
شو بيحطوا بقلبه لهذا الاتفاق؟
So it's very similar.
Okay.
So just like you negotiate before the marriage in Islam
أي.
for an amount, if anything happens, if you get divorced, if anything like that, it's very similar. It's just a legal contract that's binding that you can take to court and say, this is what we agreed to before the marriage.
سو هذا عقد قانوني، يعني انه اذا سمح الله صار في طلاق بيمشي الاتفاق اللي صاير، ما خص القانون تبع الولايه انه شو بيقول القانون قديش بياخد شو.
It does. So it's state by state specific.
طيب.
I'm talking about Florida law, and I can only talk about
أكيد.
Florida law. But in Florida, you can negotiate everything before you get married. So you can say in front of the sheikh and in writing, if we were to get divorced, this is how much you owe me. These are the reasons you owe me this. If you cheat, you owe me an extra X amount.
والله.
You can negotiate pretty much anything. You cannot negotiate child support.
شو اسباب الدومستيك فايلنس اللي عم بتصير او العنف الاسري اللي عم بيصير بحالات الطلاق اللي عم يمرقوا قدامكم؟
So we work with several domestic violence organizations in South Florida. We've been on the Discovery Channel working with one of these organizations. And what we predominantly see in these types of relationships and why these things happen is there's some sort of frustration. They're not compatible. The husband and wife are not compatible. There is a history of mental illness and they've known about this, but it's just, it's built over time. And the frustration leads to the domestic violence. So the majority of the time we see the men hitting the women, and the women are trapped because they are housewives. So they're taking the abuse in front of their children, which leads into a cycle. You don't want this cycle for your kids. Your kids see this and then they start doing it for the next generation.
لما بيكون في عنف أسري، يعني لما بيكون في domestic violence بشكل عام، هل يا ترى هيدا they're forced to divorce ولا they can work it out through counseling?
I would say 9 times out of 10 they work it out. So even on the cases we've worked on, where we take these cases pro bono or we take them low cost, the women always usually go back to the man.
In terms of child support,
Yes.
when parents are getting divorced, how is that, determined?
Whether you're married or not married, there can be child support. So you can have a child out of wedlock and you can have them during the marriage. Child support is a calculation. So it's based on mother's income, father's income, and also what extracurriculars, who's paying for health insurance, after school care. Also, how many overnights the child is spending with each parent. So if it's a 50-50 time sharing, meaning the child spends 50% of the year with the mom, 50% of the year with the dad, that also gets plugged in. If they're spending more time with one parent, then the child support is going to vary.
يعني على طول الزلمة هو اللي بيدفع ولا الأوقات المرأة هي اللي بتدفع؟
No, every case is different.
Okay.
So for example, if the wife makes more money, the husband's paying for the majority, then she might have to pay child support. So it just depends.
Let's say اثنيناتهم بيشتغلوا، بس واحد منهم بيشتغل يعني بيقبض تشيكس وهيك شغلات، وفي واحد بياخد كاش ماني. شو بصير بهذه الحالة؟
The $1,000,000 question. We always get these calls. Most of the men that we in the Arab community are cash only business. You have to look at the bank statements, you have to look at the credit card statements, and if they're very smart and nothing is on these statements, which they usually are, we look at their lifestyle. Are they driving a Range Rover? Are they driving a BMW? Are they driving a Mercedes? If they are, how are they supporting this? And that's the argument that we have to convince the judge. Are they living in a 5-bedroom house? Well, if the statement shows $1,000 in the bank account, but the mortgage is being paid for and the car is being paid for and the Rolex is being paid for, the judge is convinced.
إذا حدا بده يتبنى for any reason، يمكن ما عندهم أولاد، يمكن whatever the reason يعني أو السبب يمكن يكون، كيف فيهم يتبنوا حدا؟ وين بيطلعوا؟ هل يا ترى في منظمات بتعمل هيك؟ شو البروسس؟
It depends on the type of adoption. So there's step-parent adoption, which is much more simple than a normal adoption or a regular adoption. With a step-parent adoption, that means the family has gotten remarried, one of the spouses has gotten remarried, and they've remarried somebody who wants to adopt their children. In that scenario, you have to terminate the rights of the biological parent in order to adopt the child. Mom gets remarried to another man.
طيب.
She has the kids. The biological father is not in the life of the kids. The stepdad says, I raised these kids for 18 years. They're my children. I want to adopt them because if anything happens to me, I want them to receive what I leave behind for them. If he doesn't adopt them, they have no right over the house, the money, nothing from him. So you have to terminate the rights of the biological father so that the stepfather can adopt.
لازم ياخذوا موافقة البيولوجيكال فادر؟
Yes.
كيف البروسس لحتى يتبنوا حدا ومن الفاستر كير هن لازم يتبنوا مش هيك؟
Yes and no.
Okay.
So they can be in the foster care system or they can be with a family member, they can be with a foster parent. If the parents died, for example, and they're with the aunt or the uncle, and the aunt and the uncle want to adopt, they have to go through the court process. They have to go through a home study.
Okay.
So somebody comes to the house and does an analysis and an investigation to make sure that the house is proper for the child. And the court process takes years. It's not something that's overnight. It's not a 3-month process. It's more complicated because the judge wants to be 100% sure that the child is in the right home.
فيهم يعملوا تبني لحدا من برات أمريكا؟
Even more complicated than what I just said.
حلو.
It depends on the country. It depends on if we have an agreement with that country. And it's actually a question we get often. Our practice doesn't do it. But for example, children in Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Iraq.
especially حرب وفي كتير أهل عم
Exactly. It's usually not very easy or possible.
بشكل عام خصوصا بأمريكا دائما نحن عنا بتفكر الجالية إنه خلص هودي أولادي، هيدي مرتي، هودي أهلي، أنا متت هني بياخدوا اللي أنا عندي إياه كله. مزبوط؟ بفلوريدا عندكم وبأمريكا؟
Florida law is different. So we have something called intestate and testate. Intestate means that you don't have a will, a trust, anything in place, estate planning. Testate means you have your papers in order. The papers decide how your assets are going to be distributed. If you have a will, you can say, I want my house to be divided between my wife and my 3 kids.
No.
Or just my wife. You can decide whatever you want, or my neighbor, whatever you want.
كثير من الرجال العربية بيعملوا الوصية الدينية، إن كان الوصية الإسلامية أو غيرها من الوصايا. هل يا ترى هيدي الوصية قانونية في ولاية فلوريدا إذا صار في طلاق لا سمح الله؟ هل يا ترى المحكمة بتعترف فيها وبتطبق البنود تبعها؟
It depends. We do Islamic wills, we do Islamic trusts, but we have to inform our clients that this might not be upheld in court if it goes against Florida law. So for example, you want to disinherit your wife. You're married, you have a wife, you have kids. Let's say you want to leave less of a percentage to your wife than, you know, what it says in Florida law, because that's what Islamically it says. Your wife has to sign a consent. She has to sign a waiver saying that she agrees to receive less than what Florida law gives her. If she does not sign this, we can still do the estate planning, but it's not going to be upheld when you pass.
طيب بهيدي النقطة بالتحديد، لأنه نحن عندنا بميشيغان بالولايات الثانية إذا في تراست مش ويل، إذا في تراست فيك تعمل ديسانهيرت للوايف. يعني إذا المرأة بدش تعطي للزلمة أو الزلمة بدوش يعطي للمرأة فيك تحطه بالتراست as long إنه أنت يعني إنه مش والله بدك تعمل ديفورس بكرة عملته قبل نهار. يعني intentions مزبوطين. إذا عملت هيك بتراست كمان it doesn't uphold بالمحكمة.
As long as you sign a waiver.
لازم يساينوا waiver.
Absolutely.
عندنا ما في
you cannot disinherit your spouse because it's against public policy.
بفلوريدا.
Correct.
بدك كمان تعمل waiver إذا أنت بدك تعطي لحدا يعني لأولادك أو لمرتك أقل من ما هن بيطلع لهم.
Correct.
طب لأولادك؟
For your kids it doesn't matter. For your spouse it does.
Okay.
So it's specifically for your spouse. If it's a minor child, the same thing. You can't disinherit your minor child from certain things in the state of Florida because if anything happens to you, who's going to be responsible? Exactly. Exactly.
طب let's say عندهم أملاك برا أمريكا وجوا أمريكا، كيف شو بيصير هون بهالحالة؟
There has to be international estate planning.
Okay.
So you have estate planning done in the state that you live in. If you have assets outside in a different country like Palestine, Lebanon, you know, الأردن, anywhere, you also have to go see an attorney there. Make sure that everything is in place so that it follows what you want after you pass away.
في شيء غلط deadly mistake، أغلاط قاتلة عم يعملوها الجالية العربية بموضوع الاسtate planning وبالبروبيت بشكل عام؟
The biggest mistake is not having it. That's the biggest mistake as a community. People think it's too expensive. I can't afford it. I don't own anything. I just have a house. Why do I need anything? They don't think that their family is going to have to pay triple unless they pay what they pay now is going to be so much cheaper than what their family is going to pay later. That's the biggest mistake. If you have a bank account, if you have a house, if you have a car, you need your estate planning. Even if you don't have assets, you still need to make a decision as to who's going to make healthcare decisions if you're in the hospital. If you're in a coma, who's going to make decisions for you? If you're out of the country and you need a mortgage payment or you need somebody to go to the bank for you, you need the power of attorney in place. Money is not the only thing that matters. There are many different things. If you're in a coma, you want to make the decision yourself.
You're still alive. You're not dead.
Correct.
So your will and trust is not going to kick in now.
Correct.
Something
you
else?
Still need your healthcare surrogate and your living will. It's different from the last will and testament. The living will says whether you want to be kept on life support or not. It should not be the responsibility of your family, the stress and the emotion and the anxiety to decide if they pull the plug or if you stay on life support. You should make that decision way ahead of time so they don't have to deal with it.
هيدي كانت حلقتنا من ولاية فلوريدا وبالتحديد مع المحامية سماح أبو خضير. هيدا النموذج والقدوة المميزة لأولادنا لازم يكونوا مثله. معلومات المحامية سماح أبو خضير ومكتب المحاماة الخاصة فيها The Florida Probate and Family Law Firm رح يكونوا موجودين بمربع التعليقات، وأكيد موجودين هن على السوشيال ميديا. نتمنى أنه تتابعون، وأيضا ما تنسوا أي سؤال عندكم إياه متعلق بالأشياء القانونية اللي بيعملها مكتبهم كمان فيكم تتواصلوا معهم لحتى يساعدوكم. كان معكم حسين هاشم وفريق عمل قناة شو الأخبار من ميامي فلوريدا. إلى اللقاء.